Hey everyone. Today on Rick's Woodworking, we're going to add an infeed to our table saw. We're going to be ripping some very long pieces of wood and need something to hold them as they come into the table saw. So if I draw the table saw like this, there's a small channel around what is a rip fence guide or square. Our blade is up here. What we're going to do is we're going to add a piece of MDF across here. We're going to support it inside this channel with a small cleat, and then out here support it with a stand. We'll make the stand the height of the saw plus a set of cleats that will hold it to that top. Now we made a base, an adjustable base a while ago, and I think I'm going to reuse that bottom part and just make a new slide for the inside to attach to this piece of MDF that I have. All the measurements will be taken in the field and specific for the table saw. So let's start by making the center shaft for our stand.
Rather than use a tape measure to measure all this up, I'm going to use the existing center shaft and just make sure that it runs through. You'll also notice that I have set up a feather board to hold everything in place. I'm going to do two passes, one horizontally, one vertically, to make sure that we get everything lined up and fitting inside the stand. To get the infeed fence to line up with the table saw, since we have some height difference between the guide and the surface, I put in some spacers. They ended up being some pieces of thin cardboard and worked out really well. I measured up the height of that center shaft while it was inside the stand and just put that in place. And here you can see the cardboard pieces on the left, and everything lines up really nicely. So now I'm going to cut up some 2x4s. That these will become part of the bed itself. It holds everything together. One of them I will use to clamp up against the rip fence, and the other one will hold the actual leg assembly. And now I'm going to cut a notch. Later on, it turns out that I didn't need this. I ended up cutting away that entire material, but originally this notch was going to fit around part of the T-square that it holds together the rip fence. So I just raised my blade on my table saw as high as I could go. That way I could get pretty close to straight cuts. And then I finish it off with a handsaw. Turns out the handsaw doesn't work too well on MDF. The teeth are a bit too aggressive. Goes through a 2x4 no problem. But here I struggled a little bit. And there you are. That's the original intent of it. But again, turns out in the end, I got rid of it. I thought about how can I put this 2x4 block in place and make sure it's good and square. And then I realized, go ahead and use the fence, line up to it, clamp from underneath the 2x4s, and then just pre-drill and stick it in place. Which is ultimately what I ended up doing. As always, with MDF, very, very important, you have to make sure that you countersink all your screws. If you don't do that, you'll end up with the surface of the MDF bulging around the screws, and that's never good. So I did that side, and I ended up doing the other side the same way, but then realized, wait a second, I can't store this thing. So I looked around my shop, found a few hinges from another project, and went ahead and put in the 2x4 on the backside of the fence, or should say the infeed table. So that infeed table with that hinge on the 2x4 lets me fold that up and tuck it into a corner, and works really well. You can see that I have my framing square off to the corner to make sure everything sits right. And then I went ahead and just put everything in place. A couple of clamps will hold it to the fence guide, the square in the front, and it works really well. Hope you enjoyed the video. I know it was short and sweet, but great addition to your table saw. Join us next time to see what else we'll build on Rick's Woodworking.